Well, welcome everyone to this week's Menlo Midweek podcast. I'm here with Aisha and with Jevon.
What's up?
And we are so sad because we think that this is Aisha's last episode with us before she moves across the world.
Yes.
And I'm trying not to be bitter about it, but I'm so excited for you and your family.
Feel
Thank
better.
you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sad. I don't want to talk about it, but I love this place so much. It's going to be hard. I pray I find a church like this, but I think it's going to be very hard to find a replacement for Menlo Church.
Well, we will never find a replacement for you.
Oh, thank you.
We're so
Pray-
excited.
Bars.
I know, right?
It's the truth.
Bars.
And Jevon, you had a very light topic this past weekend. Probably were able to just barbecue for 4th of July, no
I'm
pressure at
telling
all.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
come in on
I
Sunday.
felt like the barbecue.
Exactly.
Yes, you did.
Did you feel my heat rays coming your way? Where are you going?
It was fun. It was fun. Good topic. Good sermon.
Yeah, it was. It really was. And before we dive into that, I just want to let's just start out a little bit light, a little bit easy. If we are thinking about summertime and we're thinking about barbecuing, about food, about some kind of meal that we have when we have people over to our house, what does that look like for you and your families? I'll go first, and then I'll
Okay.
give you guys a little bit of time to think about. There's this meal that we like to make for people, especially in summertime. It's like this Japanese pasta dish.
Okay.
Where it's kind of like ramen, but it doesn't have broth in it. And so like it's kind of odd, but I feel like in Japan a lot of people eat hot food on hot night as a way to like cool down. So we've been making it for some of our neighbors. We'll go to the Japanese market, we'll get some herbs and some stuff like that to throw it in this soup with like some spicy pork.
Nice.
And then we'll mix it all up with an egg, and that's kind of like the binder and the sauce with a little bit of like mentsuyu, which is like a sweet soy sauce, and then a soy sauce, and then a little bit of like sesame oil.
Okay.
nice.
Mix that all in with some green onion.
I went to a place like
Yeah.
that in
There's a spot that pops up
San
in San Mateo.
Yes, I went
I
there.
feel like I need to be your neighbor. It's a
I
bit
know,
late
I was
now,
thinking
but
that.
like
We can
you're
have you
giving out
over.
food to neighbors. I
Well,
want to
we'll
be your
have you
neighbor.
over. Yeah, okay.
Come on, man.
So that's been our summer barbecue, like kind of like come on over, hang out in our backyard. So what about for you all? If y'all are hosting and you have people over, what's on the menu?
Too many things.
I know you love to cook and smoke meat and all that stuff. So
But I will. Actually, I'll say this: the best food I ever had at someone's house. Because I like to cook a lot of stuff, so I can cook like smash burgers, steak, ribs, brisket. Was actually at your house where I had some jollof.
Yes.
I've heard
That
about
is my
this.
special-
And what's the
Specialty.
Heard
bread
about
called?
this.
The
Puff puff.
puff puff.
It's a thousand. It's 1,000 calories.
All my
for each.
ancestors
Worth
were
it.
like, "Yes, Wakanda forever."
That's fantastic.
It was amazing, amazing.
I love cooking.
Yes. So I would say it could be anything, but I love anything getting on the grill.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
Awesome. Aisha, what about for you?
So this summer, because I'm moving, I'm normally hosting people at the house, but
Yeah.
because I'm moving, it's a great excuse to say, actually, can I come over to your house? So I have been inviting
That's
myself-
fantastic.
Pulling the
been in-
Jesus card, huh?
I have been-
Yes. Come to
Yes.
your house tonight.
I'm
Yeah.
coming over with
Dinner's
the
on you.
boys. Why don't you make that one dish?
Yeah, with
I
your
have-
tall or
I have
with your
been-
giant boys.
Literally,
They
I have
probably eat
been
everything.
imposing my family on all of my
fantastic.
friends. I'm sure they can't wait for me to get out of town. I'm like, hey, what are you doing Wednesday night? Can we come over to yours?
That's awesome.
So that's been my summer plan.
That's a good tip. Throw some stuff on the barbecue or invite yourself over to your neighbor's house.
Exactly.
I love that.
A little shrimp on the barbie.
That's so good. Well, Jevon, let's go ahead and jump into your message from last week. Super
Yeah.
light, easy topic.
Yeah.
In case people missed it, why don't you fill them in?
Yeah. How to preach a difficult message.
Yeah.
So this one was on, what does it look like for us to understand the concept of war? The question is does God seem to want so much war?
Yeah.
And obviously the answer is no. He doesn't want war, but he will enact war and use war, ultimately, which he did in the Old Testament to bring forth Jesus. And at the same time, how we should really be thinking about how the intersection, I would say, of different topics that some people may think are absolutely disconnected, but actually they're all very connected. But really to show how God used war in ancient Israel's survival to bring about Jesus's arrival. That's what the message was about.
Yeah. I love that in the beginning of each of our messages in this series, we're kind of jumping right into the, yeah, but what about this verse? And we're just naming that at the top.
Yeah.
And so how did you combat the, yeah, but what about this verse?
Yeah.
And I love that you introduced as well the overarching, like the arc of Scripture and how to introduce that as we read some of these verses and are like, well, I hope that God doesn't want war, but it says right here that he called for war. So what do I do with that?
Yeah, I think it's a tension. You know, if there's a certain tendon in your elbow, if you cut it, or in your arm will become lifeless. Or if you're in an elevator and the rod is cut, what happens? It falls.
Yeah.
I think we unfortunately try to remove all tension because it makes us uncomfortable. So part of the job as a communicator is to make sure we don't step to the side of that tension, that we embrace that tension, and that we actually use it like, I forget which martial arts it is, which you use another person's energy or their momentum into the response back. So it's just basically taking all that on, not changing the topic, not changing the subject, not like overlooking the elephant in the room, but by addressing it and asking that question. And even to maybe one-up it. So I went from, does God seem to want so much war? No. To the real question we actually should be asking, did God command for ancient Israel to destroy and kill men, women, children, and livestock? Yes.
Yeah.
Now, what do you do with that? That's where we had to have that conversation.
So, I mean, I was in service twice yesterday, so I heard your message twice. And the first time I was like, where is he going? Oh my God. Why is he doing it?
I felt that same way.
Why are we talking about this? It was a lot. And then the second one, I knew I was coming, so I was calmer. But a couple of things hit me. First of all, the idea of context. And I think what we often choose to do as believers is we will take one or two or three verses and we will just take it out and go by that. We don't read the couple verses before or the couple verses after or even think about the context of the time or the situation. And so I like how you were like, wait, let's talk about this more deeply and more broadly and also around timing, right? You read these verses, which, I mean, the verses you shared, I'd love for you to read them over because they're very jarring, right? But then you also shared, this is 400 years after God has been asking all of these communities, change your ways, change your ways, change your ways. And so for me, that was the first thing, is that we need to take these discussions in context. The second thing that I had never thought about, that just like I felt like you cracked my brain open, is this idea of the Israelites in the Bible not being, not confusing them with the state of Israel today. And honestly, I mean, when you said it, I was like, duh. But honestly, I had not thought about that before. I saw them as one and the same. And I really feel like we need to shout that on top of the mountain, and not for judgment purpose, but for putting things in context.
Yeah, I think that's really the really important thing. And so for this message, so special thank you to Rabbi Matt. And he is one of my best friends, and he's a Messianic rabbi, so Jewish brother who believes that Jesus or Yeshua is the Messiah. And special shout out to Condoleezza Rice for helping, like, even just help me think through some of the things and how to phrase certain things. Now, again, both of those people, even though they helped me with the sermon, they also, didn't see or hear like the finished version of that too. So there may even be some things, that maybe they might be like, I might have said it that way, might not have said it that way, or might have said it differently. But it was really important for me from a Jewish perspective to understand some of those things, and then also from a foreign policy perspective to really understand some of these things and how to articulate these in a way that might be helpful versus unhelpful. Now, whether I did that or not, we'll see. And, you have to do your best with the time that you have. In 30 minutes,
It's tough.
it's kind of a short amount of time to talk about some of those things, but it was really important to help frame that conversation, receive some wisdom, get some feedback from people, and figure out how to have that conversation. And because part of the reason why is the different distortions that I named. If you go to one opposite side, you become a replacement person. If you go to the opposite side of it, you become the person who just condones and stamps everything because you don't rightly understand even that there are some people who are operating even as maybe like a modern state, not just Israel, but other countries, that their mindset is not around religion. Their mindset is around something completely different.
Yes.
And if we unintentionally attribute something to them, it will make the conversation even more unhelpful.
Yeah.
So that was some of the things that was really important to me as I had to kind of frame this conversation.
Yeah. And I like too that in your process of framing the conversation, you named some clear objections to it. You brought people like Dawkins, who are just like, man, when I read the Bible, I see God as a unjust warmonger.
Yeah.
And so how did you like choose to incorporate that? And how can we get a conversation going that's nuanced, that if we are in this with, let's say, a neighbor or a friend that's like, but what about this?
Yeah.
What's helpful, and how can we enter into that conversation well?
Yeah, I think it's never a good idea to deny it.
Yeah.
I think it's
That's a good
number
start.
one, because then you're a liar, and you're just trying to fabricate something, or you're trying to like mislead me, which I don't think is appropriate, and I don't think that's godly.
Okay.
God, like I think C.S. Lewis is rightly attributed for saying God, a lion doesn't need defending. God
True
doesn't
that.
need me to defend him.
Okay.
He's God. I'm not.
Yeah.
I might communicate the things that he's talking about as one person, but I do not need to defend a lion. I can help give a defense or an understanding or an apologetic, but I'm not called to change a person's mind, because I do believe in my doctrine of soteriology, of the understanding of how people get saved, and my pneumatology, the doctrine of God the Holy Spirit, that saving is his job.
Yes.
That changing people's minds and hearts is his job.
Wow.
So my job is to be a communicator and allow God to do that work. Now, I don't want to do that work ineffectively. I don't want to hinder God the Holy Spirit. I want to actually be a conduit by which he can do his work of regeneration and transformation and salvation. But I have to understand that a person can't be changed purely on my intellect or my ability to construct a sermon.
Yep.
Would it be helpful? Absolutely. But we see in the scriptures that God spoke to the creation, and creation had to obey it. Even if light didn't exist, when God said, let there be light, light had to listen.
Yeah.
And that's the power of God. So I think making sure you're accepting what a person's communicating to you, and then just listening. Because again, sometimes we want to have all the right answers.
Yep.
And sometimes we want to, be like, oh, I got to give a defense. God didn't ask you to do all that. So I think you should just relax, receive that. And then also, too, a great mathematician named John Lennox. He is a great apologist. He was a professor at Oxford. In one of his debates that he's done recently, or it was a while ago, a person asked him a question. They said, Mr. Lennox, you're obviously a very learned man. You have you're an elite of elites. You're a genius. But yet you believe in a God who limits you, and who asked for, Adam and Eve to not eat from the tree, and ultimately have denied you knowledge. And he said, how do you answer a question like that? He said, because this is what I believe, that you are being limited. He said, so when you hear that question, how would you respond to that? He said, well, I've actually heard that question before. This is what John Lennox was saying. And he's like, oh, how have you heard that question? He said, it was originally said by a snake.
Dang. Yeah.
And that's the thing. Satan is the deceiver who always tries to twist God's character.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what conversation we're talking about.
Yep.
Did God really say? God's withholding from you. God's not being clear with who he is. God's tricking you. That's the lies of the enemy. And I think that's something that when we're talking about these conversations, these are lies that the enemy whispers. And he's been whispering them for a long, long time. But he's a one-trick pony.
Yeah.
He is the father of lies. He is the deceiver. And he is an accuser of the brethren. But that's all he does. And he just deceives. So if the enemy can deceive people by us not being honest, then that's how he'll use it.
one of the things that I try to introduce in my mind when we're talking about public policy is, I think we can use the Bible to our own benefit, right? Like if we're not
Sure.
very happy, we switch to the, the God of the Old Testament. And then when we're very happy with, very forgiving, the God who brought his son. And I think that you can go back and forth, but one thing I feel like as Christians we need to do a better job of is just remembering that the greatest commandment is to love each other,
Yep.
right? And so I think that because right now society has become very polarizing. You're either left, you're either right, you're either Republican, you're either, like you have to be one or the other. And I think the one thing that sits in the middle of that is God's call that we love each other as much as Christ loves the church and loves us.
I mean, and I think too, like to that point, it's because God said that the world will know you by your love.
Yeah.
that you have, right?
Yeah.
But and then at the same time, like God's not into your political ideology. Like he's into having your heart. And there's this beautiful passage in the Old Testament where there's this battle happening, and that's it's with this figure called Melchizedek, right? And Abram asks this question, who later on becomes Abraham. He says, "Are you for us or are you against us?" And he's like, "No."
Okay.
He's like, "I'm not for you. I'm not here for your little games. I'm not here for your little battle. I'm here for myself." And like when you see Psalm 143, where David says, "In your righteousness, answer me. In your faithfulness, answer me, not based on my own righteousness and my own faithfulness, but because of yours." Oftentimes we're looking for Jesus to co-opt, or we're trying to co-opt Jesus into our plan in our section of what we believe. Again, it could be politics. It could be, a certain theological framework. It can be anything. We like to do those things. We like to co-opt God because we think that it gives us a sense of approval. And we try to make sure that God gets down with our thing versus us get down with his thing, which again is going to be love and grace and kindness and mercy. But also he does judge wickedness. And he will not let those things go unaddressed, because he, like a loving parent, would make sure that his child knows that the way that you're acting, the things that you're doing, will lead to your destruction. It is not loving of me to act like it's not true. It's loving for me to step into the midst of it, even if it causes pain.
Can you double click on that perspective when we read in the Old Testament how God did command war and how ultimately that can bring redemption and can bring peace?
Yeah, I think it's just a weird thing, but you think about, I think it's multi-layered. Now, what I don't want people to start getting into is things of like just war theory, where where people are just trying to say, well, everything is justified and anybody and everybody. So I don't want to get into that, and I don't want anyone to even listen to the sermon and think that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Right? But what I want us to really understand is that the scripture says, "Blessed are the peace," what?
Makers.
In order to have peace, sometimes you have to make peace. And in order for us to understand that the scriptures, in order for us to understand that the scriptures will say, if for example, if God says he looks at the creation and the scriptures say that it's formless and void, but even that there were existing materials already there, which is a whole kind of even another topic, where it says that he spoke, and his word, which John talks about, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then in John 1:14, the Word became flesh and tabernacled, or lived among us. But Colossians, the book of Colossians talks about how Jesus, in him, all things are held together and consist, and that all of creation was created by the Word of God, by Jesus as the Word. So you see that Jesus is a creator. So when God speaks, the active force is Jesus. It's the Word now coming forth, empowered by God the Holy Spirit. So when you think about this reality of the power of God, he shapes and fashions creation in order to bend it to what should be happening. And even the call for us as image bearers was to subdue the earth. And remember when Jesus comes into the temple, and trust me, these are all connected. I swear, I promise. When Jesus comes into the temple and sees his father's house being used to sell all of these different sacrifices, he said, "You've turned my father's house into a den of thieves." In Jewish culture, during this time, the kids are actually supposed to help the parents clean out the house of all the leaven. So what Jesus is doing is he's actually doing what Jewish families would do, is he's cleaning out any of the leaven to make sure that Passover will be complete. So when he does this, he's actually saying, "You've turned my father's house into a den of thieves." And it says he goes and fashions a whip. Jesus, I can't even imagine what he was thinking. I'm about to whip these people. I'm
Out of my house.
Out of my house, right? But he fashions what needs to happen in order for it to be clean. God will fashion what needs to happen in order to bring order from chaos. So God always brings order to chaos. It's always his justice that's applied to injustice, and his shalom, which is his peace, which is always applied to the chaos of the world. So even in the cross of Christ, we have God applying justice, but he's bringing to chaos, he's bringing peace to chaos. But the way that he brings peace to chaos is by circumventing and actually using violence upon himself. So it just speaks to God's supreme bossness, I think, as Pastor Eric Mason would say, just God's supreme bossness to actually just say, here's how these things, I am over them completely, but I cannot stand for people to be victims of injustice. And one rapper said, it's like candy. God's going to do it now or later. He's going to exact justice and do what he needs to do. But we have to also remember that we are not God and we are finite and we can't even understand or comprehend God's mind in that sense. But yet at the same time, God makes himself known and he makes himself relatable, and he also makes himself accessible in the person, in the work of Jesus Christ, which that's a whole nother mind like just bender.
I have a question though. You know, right now I think the world is at war in 3 or 4 or 5 different places. And as a believer, how do we put that in context in our minds about war today? So even if let's say we walk away from this and say, you know, God's objective is not to be killing people and plunder and women and children unless it is to further his kingdom. Right now, we have a bunch of wars going on. How do you advise, believers to think about that?
Well, I also would probably correct the first statement that you made. God doesn't use violence to further his kingdom. In that particular time during the Old Testament, I mean, think about it. Like, this is how land was won. This is how battle was won. Like, he had to literally set Israel free from Pharaoh. Which, again, in even all those gods, God killed all the gods of Egypt, ultimately ending when he blots out the sun. It's actually him showing that Pharaoh is not God, because he was called the morning and the evening star. So he shows him, you're not God. And all your gods of the river and the Nile and cattle, I killed them. And I set my people free. In order for it to be constituted, for people to actually be considered a people, you need to have land. You needed to have government. And you needed to also have a people. So God creates for himself a people. He brings them into the desert to give them government, and then ultimately brings them to give them land, which is the promised land, right? So we even see the context by which that Old Testament people actually even lived. It's not. So I would just augment that a little bit in saying it that way, because if we're not careful, then we might think that God comes to wage war just to build his kingdom, even at the expense of people. But we have to see that a lot of these nations had military armies. But it says that he is the God who fights your what?
Yeah.
The battles.
Your battles.
So he is like, I am the army. So I will fight your battles for you. So I think that how we approach these conversations of wars today, it's the world's broken, the world's falling, and these are actually things that God told us about in the scriptures that say, in the last days, there's going to be wars. People are going to be destroying one another. There's going to be earthquakes. There's going to be all this kind of stuff because the Romans would say that that as sin entered into the world, God, not sin, but God subject the earth into futility. And now the earth, even all of creation, is groaning, asking God, pleading with God, please come back and make things right. So I think when we're talking about the nations, why do the nations rage? There always will be raging. Just like Jesus said, the poor will be with you always. It doesn't mean we neglect the poor or don't help the poor because there are always going to be poor people. It means we do the right thing with all of those things within its proper context. Okay. So when it comes to these wars, we understand that these are the things that are going to happen. Again, because people want power. Some people want authority. And then some people actually want to feel some measure of safety. And so they're willing to do anything and everything they do to make to either make sure that they feel safe, which again, I don't think being safe is a wrong thing. But what will you do in order to get safety? Do the ends justify the means?
There you
and
go.
I think oftentimes because we are not God, and why we need to understand that God's judgment is not human vengeance, we have a hard time disconnecting the two.
I'll add to that a bit, and then I'd love for you to expand, Jevon. I feel like, too, we often compartmentalize it's either people or God. But we know from the scriptures that there's also another side of spiritual that is bad and that also wants to wage war here. Principalities, powers, and you alluded to that in your message.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like, man, I've seen from like living abroad in other places where there are clear spiritual things that are happening there that's kind of unlike what's happening here in Menlo Park, California.
Yeah.
That's just like, man, there's clear power that comes from another place that isn't from God and that is evil, that is separated there. And that also has a force on the world.
Yes.
And so the intersection of those two, I loved how you pointed out it's not just people that are fighting here, but there's also a spiritual component.
Yeah.
As we are spiritual beings on the earth.
Yes.
There's also another side of that that's happening as well.
Yes, and I think that is one of the craziest things. But if people miss that, oh my goodness, you even take it another layer deeper because, again, when I mentioned that God kills all the gods of Egypt, right?
Right.
Systematically, one by one. But you have to remember how people orient themselves around gods in worship. They are the facilitators of economy because of my cattle, because of the river, because of how how the grain grows. If there are locusts, you destroy economics. Yeah. So all of the gods that represent the ecosystem or the economics of Egypt, God absolutely obliterates, showing that they're insufficient and they're not on His level. And the same thing happens when it says, in the book of Deuteronomy, Psalm 82, where it talks about these sons of God. Now, during the Tower of Babel, part of the reason why, when you look at the account of the Tower of Babel, again, now these are things that this is a theological perspective that I adhere to. Not everyone shares this particular view, but people like Michael Heiser, who's recently passed away, and other people, theologians and commentators have a different view of this backdrop, which I actually would agree with, is the spiritual backdrop to understand that part of the reason when you read the Tower of Babel, you reading it as if humans build a tower and seek to be God, and then God comes and slaps it down and then confuses the nations. And it just seems like, okay, if God is threatened by human beings in that type of way, we have to have a conversation. He's not threatened by any human being nor created being because He created them.
Yeah.
But what it actually gives more of a motif is that these sons of God who were actually called to actually be these representatives and help govern the nation with God, because God has always been a communal God. He's always sharing within Himself. He's always sharing power. He's always sharing responsibility, which after He creates these beings and they go their own way, that's what makes the fall of humanity so significant, because the same thing happens from what He already created. And so as there's this reality of demonic spiritual forces, like how does Satan get into the garden already? And if you guys want some more stuff on that, the Bible Project does some really, really great stuff on that, which will be available in the show notes as well to that. But that speaks about this spiritual battle, which is part of the reason why, again, God flooded the earth with Noah. that there was a time of great wickedness that all, and then you get into the later on in the New Testament, and you'll hear about the stories again of the Philistines, right? Philistines being descendants of, these angels and humans that were, born, that after they are, it says that they would go into these sons, or these spiritual powers would go into the daughters of man. And so that's why I think even just with Greek mythology and all these other aspects within the world, people aren't shocked when they're seeing these angelic beings or creatures, just like Mary and other people. They're like, who is this? Right?
Yeah.
They're not,
Interesting.
they're surprised, but they're not too surprised.
Yeah.
So I think that a lot of these things are these broken images of, again, the seed. Satan has always been trying to get the seed to come from him to destroy God's people, and ultimately to not have Jesus come forth. So if you even look throughout that whole line, the people of Israel, as God is forming them into a people and a nation, the seed, they're always attacked. They're always, trying to be killed so that Jesus could not come. But God's like, here's even how I'm going to do it. I'm even going to use a virgin. So I'm not even going to do it the way that you guys do it, the way that the evil forces do it. I'm going to do it differently.
Wow.
And I'm going to do it not by forcing myself upon someone, but choosing and having a conversation with, like when you hear Mary say, may it be done unto me, your servant.
Yeah.
So it's a whole spiritual battle behind it. But if we don't see that there's actually forces behind people and their wickedness, that it's a merging of those two. And so if we don't understand that, we will look at our neighbor and say, you're evil.
Right.
Now, they are all fallen just like we are, but we need to be redeemed by God. But if we don't understand that the God of this world, as the scriptures say, have blinded their minds and their eyes, and they are actually prisoners of war versus the real enemy. That's why Paul says the wrestle is not against flesh and blood, not you and you, not that country and not that country, but against principalities and powers.
Yeah.
That's good.
I mean, I could even double click on that when you were talking yesterday about wars at the national level and this concept of powers and principalities. I kind of brought it down to my level.
Yep.
And how, I can attempt to be in conflict with a person. Yeah. My neighbor, my cousin, my sister, my da-da-da-da-da. And I started to tell myself, I was like, God, please help me depersonalize sometimes when I'm in potential situations that create conflict, because the thing that's causing the conflict may not be the person. It is this power and this principality that wants to create a schism between me and this person, wants to sow conflict, wants to do all these things. And so I'm starting to learn, wait. It's not you, Mark. There's a devil going on here, and the devil could be trying to influence me. And so I need to spend some time thinking about what's actually happening here that's beyond the individual, and where is the conflict coming from, and who benefits in the state of the conflict. And it's generally the devil.
Yeah, well, I mean, and when we get into that conversation of the spiritual aspect, you have some Christians who they'll over-index and blame everything on the devil or everything on spiritual stuff. And then the other people, they're like, oh, no, it was just the person who did what they did. But if you look at it, God created us and he gives us a will, right? And as even, again, we can have debates on what's the full extent of the will, like how is it limited, is it full type of will? But when you see like the decision that Adam and Eve make in the garden, they choose of their own volition. At the same time, they were also influenced. So we even have to understand that principle with another person or with the war. They may be intentional in choosing it in themselves. But at the same time, it's also something else behind it. And so what we don't want to do, again, is over-index on either or of the spectrum, but rightly hold them. So if we don't rightly hold them and don't nuance them, we can go to either side where we won't hold people responsible for their their transgressions. We'll just be like, oh, it's kind of like that saying, boys will be boys. It's just like, oh, demons will be demons. But it's like, nah, fam, you're like legitimately like harming people and hurting people. You can't blame it on the spirit.
You're the conduit of the spirit.
Yeah. So we really have to, which is why God was like, don't mess with these spirits. Occult practices, witchcraft, all these things. He's like, don't mess with that. And again, I think part of the reason why God says don't mess with that It's because he knows what will happen, just like we covered in Deuteronomy chapter 20, that these are the things that happen when you start to embrace these things. They will destroy you. The enemy will destroy you. When you start
Yes.
practicing the occult, when you start diving into like sexual deviation, when you start going into sacrificing your children, all these things, he's like, if you don't kill these people, if you don't do this, if you're not serious about what I'm telling you, they will lead you to corruption and you will die. Yeah. And the interesting thing is that you'll see later on in the scriptures, they actually don't kill everyone that they're supposed to. And again, they end up going where? Captivity, bondage, led astray by false worship, because they're so entrenched in and they're so used to having some kind of God. And if you remember, the first thing they do when they're set free from Egypt, what do they do when Moses is on the mountain to get the commands or the instruction from
They start
God?
following false gods.
They built for themselves a God.
Yeah.
And God's like, in a Bible project, Tim Mackey points this out very clearly. He says, the reason why he tells them not to build other idols, for example, is because God said, I already made an idol. I've made idols of myself. You are the image of God.
Wow.
So in order for people to see me and to experience me, it happens in and through you. So you should not have any other gods ahead of me. You should worship the Lord your God. That's it. But I've already created images. Yeah. I don't need a God to represent my people. You are my reflection. I will represent you, and you're my reflection to the earth.
Yeah.
Wow.
Deep.
Just need to let that sink in for a second.
Yeah.
God is dope like that.
He is.
Dope. But do you know, I was reading Exodus once. Well, one of the last times I was reading it. And I was starting to get really frustrated. I was like, yo, what are you doing? You just got saved. Now you're great. I mean, like, back and forth.
Yeah.
And I felt the Holy Spirit tell me, you're no different.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
And
I
I
felt
was
that
like,
same way.
"Woo."
Yeah,
You're no different.
Yeah.
I've done it before. I've saved you before. I've extended grace to you. I've extended mercy.
Yeah.
Each time you reach a new point in your life, you know, there's some disbelief, there's some unbelief, there's some fear, there's some anxiety. Like, you're no different from them, so don't judge.
Yeah, and that's why I talked about the false gods that we create, because we start to worship false gods and then we start to make for our own self gods. We instantly become like, hey, like when Moses is like, hey, Aaron, how'd this happen? I don't know, man. I just threw some gold in the fire and out came a calf, right? And it's just like, those are the things that we do. We just kind of, when we're scared, when we're worried, when we have fear, we seek to create things and do what the scriptures say in Romans, that they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and they worshiped created things rather than the creator who is forever blessed.
Yeah.
And so we're always exchanging stuff.
Yeah.
And God's like saying, I've already exchanged everything for you.
Yeah.
You don't need to exchange it.
That's good. That's good. Well, Jevon, for someone that's like hearing this conversation on Sunday, listening and want really to just to go a step further, what's something that you hope that people, after hearing this conversation and Sunday's message, hope that they walk away with?
Yeah, man, God's deep love. God's deep love. You don't need to defend a lion.
Yeah.
Let the lion defend himself. God clearly reveals why he did what he did. Again, I think the question always comes down to, what do we do with that? You may say that you prefer God to be this way, or you prefer him to act this way, but you're not him. And I think we have a hard time, especially in the West, being someone who has to get down with that.
Yep.
We're so autonomous.
Yep.
We're so individualistic. You know, we expect God to obey and behave the way that we think he should.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't, we're going to create a whole new system. And I think people, my encouragement would be for them they're going to have to wrestle with that. And that's part of what it means for them to surrender their life to God, to transfer the trust of themselves or what they think is best or right to God, and to know that his ways are higher than our ways and his thoughts are not our thoughts. Now, does that make it easier? No. But that's why Jesus would say, you know, you have to lose your life. If you want to gain your life, you have to lose it. And I don't know how many people are willing to die to themselves in order to receive. I know I wouldn't, apart from a miracle. And so I'm praying that they would understand that the miracle of their rebirth through the resurrection and the death of Jesus is here for them now.
Yeah. That's good. Jevon, thank you, as always.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate your nuance, your willingness to step into a hard topic as well. And
Yeah.
Aisha, that goes the same for you. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. Why you always ask me to come on for the hard
know!
conversations?
Yeah.
But no, I think this conversation is hard, and it's so uniquely challenging. But I'm so grateful that we can try to model conversation that gets at more so how our posture and response should be while listening, while in the conversation, as well as what our perspective should be. And that perspective is to try to bring God's kingdom here.
Yeah.
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 And
Yeah.
so-
And with that, man, I would just say to the people who are like, hey, I'm looking to go deeper in some of the stuff, because I was talking about eschatology.
You were.
I was
You
talking
used a lot of
about,
big words. You fit a
Yeah,
lot of my
I
church
know.
bingo
all
card,
the
bro.
isms. Some great books that I would just say for people to be able to read is The Return of the King by Vern Poythress, A Case for All Millennialism by Kim Riddlebarger. Can't even pronounce that name either. Surprised by Hope by N.T. Wright, which is great.
Oh, yeah.
And those are some of the things that, again, that's what I lean towards. But at the same time, you still have some of those things in it that you're going to kind of have to figure out how to navigate. So I think that all of the different, eschatological views are, they all have their pluses and minuses.
Sure.
And we all won't know ultimately. But we can lean into certain things. But one of the things that really encouraged me, and I want to encourage everybody here today, is when we're talking about the end times and when we're talking about everything that's happening, is what Vern Poythress said. When you're trying to look at the book of Revelation, is to understand that the literature, the literature genre of that book is actually, it's apocalyptic, and it has a lot of Old Testament references, a lot of symbolism. And he said the easier way to understand a lot of this is to see the book of Revelation as a picture book versus a puzzle book. And so as we're thinking about how do these rumors of wars and all these other things, or how do the scriptures, even some of the evil forces and the principalities and the powers, how do these all intersect, is to think about it as a picture book versus a puzzle book. Because God's not trying to trick us. God's not trying to let us be out in the dark. He's clearly revealed himself and clearly revealed things to us. We have to listen. He who has an ear, let him hear,
hear.
what the Spirit says to the church.
That's so good.
I'd like to just add one thing that you can never stop praying for is wisdom.
Oh, gosh,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
Because a lot of times you pray about things, he who has ears, let them hear. You can get influenced.
Oh, for
and
sure.
I have always leaned on, praying for wisdom, discernment, and understanding
Yes.
so that you do make the right decisions.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes, we do need wisdom, and that's what the Shema is all about. Hear, O Lord, Israel, our God is one. And I love that. In the hearing, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, in the word Shema, listen means listen and do. And so it's like when you're talking to your child, you heard me, but you're not hearing me. Listen and do. We need that wisdom. We really do need that.
Yes. That's
great. Well, if you need any encouragement this week, if you need help listening or discerning, please text our team, 650-600-0402. We've got a wonderful team that is encouraging and wanting to step into whatever you're carrying with you. So with that, everyone have a great week, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Deuces.